Hello and welcome back to this video series on static and dynamic data structures. In this video, I want to focus on this last bullet point here, is discussing the use cases for dynamic data structures. And so we've previously talked about these static arrays. We give a few examples, use cases, but in this video, I want to briefly introduce something called dynamic data structures. So we'll look at something called the ArrayList. We'll look at something called the linked list, hash set, and the hash map. And this is just a few of the different collections that you can use. And they stem from this interface called collection that makes available these abstract methods. And it's the children classes that give the implementation of these abstract methods that are defined in the interface of collection. And so let's go ahead and jump ahead in our slideshow. So collections and generics, and then I'll talk about generics a little bit later, but let's focus our attention on collections. All right, there's a number of different type of collections that you can use within Java. So here's kind of just a small tree structure of how these particular collections are related. You'll see this keyword interface, and this is kind of what I mentioned earlier, is that it's an abstract interface. It basically provides a set of abstract methods. A better way of saying it is it provides a bunch of different methods that do not have a method body that can be extended and used in other classes. And I'm not going to get into the inner workings of interface and implementation, but more so I want to just really focus our attention on how to use a few of these particular collections, such as the ArrayList and the hash set, and then briefly talk about hash map. So what is a collection? It basically allows you to group together these objects, very similar to an array, but a collection provides a little bit more advanced functionality, such as adding, removing, targeting certain particular items within the array, and then you can do a lot more than what you could do with this static array, which is pretty much predefined in terms of how big the array that you declare that static array is going to be. But collections are dynamic and more extensible in terms of how we can actually use them in our program and organize data in our programs. Here's just a few of some of the frequently used collections that we'll go over: the ArrayList, the linked list, the hash map, and then the hash set. The ArrayList and the linked list and the hash set are very similar. And I would say that the ArrayList and the linked list are very similar. Not much differs between the two, but I would say the construction of these two are vastly different. Where linked lists actually, they're linked together where they have something called pointers, and it points to another particular item on a heap in memory. Where the ArrayList is very much like it has a static array or just a regular array within it. But again, not necessarily diving too deep in terms of how these particular collections are structured, but just know that the ArrayList, the linked list, the hash set are very similar, and the hash set is essentially where it can only have unique values. And so, for instance, if an ArrayList, if you had apples, bananas, apples, you can have all three: apples, bananas, apples. You can have apples twice. But the hash set, it would delete or it would not allow you to have apples twice. It would say apples, bananas, and it would not say the apples a third time. So that's the uniqueness about the hash set, is that it only can contain unique values. All right, so let's look at a little bit of code regarding ArrayList, and then here's just a briefly coded example here. And what I'm going to do is copy this code, and I'm going to take this code and put it into something called online GDB. So online editor, and I'll paste this in. And let's just run it to make sure everything works correctly. Yep, got to import, right? So don't forget that. So import java.util ArrayList. And then we also need the candy object. So that's another thing that we need to bring in. So we have another class here called candy, and I'll just copy that code, Control C, because what we're going to do is we're going to store these candy objects into a list. And so I'll create a new file here. I'll just call this candy.java, and I'll paste it in. All right, so now if we go back to our program, we should be able to run this program, and it should run accordingly. There we go. Okay, before I dive into the structure of this program, what I want to do is just boil down. I want to just put a comment here. Just talk about ArrayList at a very basic level. And so let me just comment this out here and say a few words about ArrayList. So right now, because I've commented everything out in this program, what really all I have is just the main method. So here's the opening of the main method, and then here's the closing of the main method. And then everything else is in green, which indicates it's commented out. And so if I want to declare an array list, and I'm using an array list because it's one of the more commonly used collections that you'll see in a lot of different programs. So the array list, we would say array list. And then you'll see that there's this opening and closing, I like to say greater than less than sign. But then what we could do here is we can enforce what actually is contained in this list. And so if we wanted to enforce only strings, we can do that and say string. But if we don't have to use, and that's called a generic, we don't have to actually use anything. We could just say array list and then just give this a variable name. And so we could say array list, and then say a list, or we could say fruit equals new array list. And this is creating a new instance of an array list, and it's reserving memory for all the fruit that will be held on this list. But in this case here, I want to enforce that only items that are of string data type can be held in this list. And this is what we call type enforcement. So I'll say array list here, and I'll also enforce it. I'll also declare it here as well. Again, this is array list that only can contain string data type, and we're going to add some fruit to this list. So how do I add items to this list? With an array, you would do the subscript, and you would say position 0 or index 0 equals some fruit. But with an array list, we would say something such as fruit dot. We have to use this method called add, and in this case here we could say banana. Now the question becomes this: well, how did you know to use the add method? And part of that comes from the documentation that you just have to do a little bit of research on. So if I just go here and let's pick an array list in Java. Let's scroll down here to the Oracle Docs, who manages the documentation. And then here's our class ArrayList. And then if I scroll down, you'll see that it has a number of different constructors. We talked about constructors in other videos in this that I've recorded. So it has constructors that are overloaded, but then we'll see that we have some methods that we can use. So here's add. We can say add all. We can add another collection. We could clear all the items from our list. So if we were to add everything, we could clear and remove all the items from our list. We could check to see if an item is on our list by using the contains. We can get a specific item by giving an index. And so we could use a number of these different methods. And that's why I say that ArrayList is very dynamic in the sense that it's a little bit more powerful than an array where you have all this different functionality that's at your disposal. So in this case here, I could keep adding things to this list. So I could say fruit.add. We could say pear, and let's add one more. Fruit.add, and let's say strawberry. So right now, I could check to see how many items are on my list. I could say fruit.size, and if I were to output this or print this out to the console, I say system .out.print line. And this is where I output this to the console. It should give me the total number of items on my list. So if I run this here, all right, there we go. I have to bring up the terminal. I have 3 items on my list, and so size is one of the methods that get the total number of values that is on that are contained within your array list. Another method I can use here is I can clear out all the items in my list. And so if I were to go here and just say fruit.clear, then if I were to say fruit.size, there should be 0 because it's going to clear all the items on line 18, and then it's going to say, what is the size? Well, it's cleared out, so it's 0. So if I run this here, we get 0, right? And again, these are just some of the different methods, and I would invite you to play around with these different methods, get familiar with them. They're very powerful in terms of what you can do here. One more thing before I stop this video, and then in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a more exhaustive, a little bit more detailed example that I've commented out. But another method here is how do we get an item from our list? And again, we're just only working with string values. But in our next video, we'll take a look at how do we actually work with objects. We can add objects to this list and begin to do certain things. So in this case here, if I wanted to pull out pair, I can say, I'm going to get rid of this clear here. And I can say fruit.get, and I want to say position or index 1. If I want to, I can store that into a variable. I can say string item at position 1. And then I can just basically take that variable and output it, and we should get pair. So run this code, and there we go, right? So these are just some of the basic methods, and again, there's a lot more that we can do with what the ArrayList provides us in terms of some of the different methods. But nonetheless, these are just some of a few that are at our disposal, such as the add, the clear, the get method, and we can pass in an index, and so forth. So I'm going to pause this video here because it's getting a little bit on the long side. But in the next video, I'm going to uncomment the rest of the code here that you see in green, and we're going to look at how do we generate or how do we hold objects within a list. And so stay tuned for that video.